Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing. That was a bit sing-songy, I don't know why that was the case, but oh well. Anyway, we are going to continue today to read The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells, so let's get on with that. He saw these things with Howard shouting in his ear and shaking his arm, and then suddenly Howard was gone and he stood alone. He perceived that the cries of "the sleeper" grew in volume, and that the people on the nearer platform were standing up. The nearer platform he perceived was empty to the right of him, and far across the space, the platform running in the opposite direction was coming crowded and passing away bare. With incredible swiftness, a vast crowd had gathered in the central space before his eyes. A dense, swaying mass of people, and the shouts grew from a fitful crying to a voluminous, incessant clamour. The sleeper, and yells and cheers, a waving of garments and cries of "Stop the ways." They were also crying another name, strange to Graham. It sounded like Ostrog. The slower platforms were soon thick with active people, running against the movement so as to keep themselves opposite to him. "Stop the ways," they cried. Agile figures ran up from the centre to the swift road nearest to him, were borne rapidly past him, shouting strange, unintelligible things, and ran back obliquely to the central way. One thing he distinguished. "It is indeed the sleeper. It is indeed the sleeper," they testified. For a space Graham stood motionless. Then he became vividly aware that all this concerned him. He was pleased at his wonderful popularity. He bowed, and seeking a gesture of longer range, waved his arm. He was astonished at the violence of uproar that this provoked. The tumult about the descending stairway rose to furious violence. He became aware of crowded balconies, of men sliding along ropes, of men in trapeze-like seats, hurling athwart the space. He heard voices behind him, a number of people descending the steps through the archway. He suddenly perceived that his guardian Howard was back again, and gripping his arm painfully and shouting inaudibly in his ear. He turned, and Howard's face was white. "Come back," he heard. "They will stop the ways. The whole city will be in confusion." He perceived a number of men hurrying along the passage of blue pillars behind Howard, the red-haired man, the man with the flaxen beard, a tall man in vivid vermilion, a crowd of others in red carrying staves, and all these people had anxious, eager faces. "Get him away," cried Howard. "But why?" said Graham. "I don't see—" "You must come away," said the man in red in a resolute voice. His face and eyes were resolute too. Graham's glances went from face to face, and he was suddenly aware of that most disagreeable flavour in life, compulsion. Someone gripped his arm. He was being dragged away. It seemed as though the tumult suddenly became two, as if half the shouts that had come in from this wonderful roadway had sprung into the passages of the great building behind him. Marvelling and confused, feeling an impotent desire to resist, Graham was half led, half thrust, along the passage of blue pillars, and suddenly he found himself alone with Howard in a lift and moving swiftly upward. Chapter 6. The Hall of the Atlas. From the moment when the tailor had bowed his farewell to the moment when Graham found himself in the lift was altogether barely 5 minutes. As yet the haze of his vast interval of sleep hung about him. As yet the initial strangeness of his being alive at all in this remote age touched everything with wonder, with the sense of the irrational, with something of the quality of a realistic dream. He was still detached, an astonished spectator, still but half involved in life. What he had seen, and especially the last crowded tumult, framed in the setting of the balcony, had a spectacular turn, like a thing witnessed from the box of a theatre. "I don't understand," he said. "What was the trouble? My mind is in a whirl. Why were they shouting? What is the danger?" "We have our troubles," said Howard. His eyes avoided Graham's enquiry. "This is a time of unrest. and, in fact, your appearance, your waking just now, has a sort of connection. He spoke jerkily, like a man not quite sure of his breathing. He stopped abruptly. "I don't understand," said Graham. "It will be clearer later," said Howard. He glanced uneasily upward, as though he found the progress of the lift slow. "I shall understand better, no doubt, when I have seen my way about a little," said Graham, puzzled. It is bound to be perplexing. At present it is all so strange. Anything seems possible, anything. In the details even. Your counting, I understand, is different." The lift stopped and they stepped out into a narrow but very long passage between high walls, along which ran an extraordinary number of tubes and big cables. "What a huge place this is," said Graham. "Is it all one building? What place is it?" "This is one of the city ways for various public services, light and so forth." Was it a social trouble in the great roadway place? "How are you governed? Have you still a police?" "Several," said Howard. "Several? About 14. I don't understand." "Very probably not. Our social order will probably seem very complex to you. To tell you the truth, I don't understand it myself very clearly. Nobody does. You will, perhaps, by and by. We have to go to the council." Graham's attention was divided between the urgent necessity of his inquiries and the people in the passages and halls they were traversing. For a moment his mind would be concentrated upon Howard and the halting answers he made, and then he would lose the thread in response to some vivid, unexpected impression. Along the passages in the halls, half the people seemed to be men in the red uniform. The pale blue canvas that had been so abundant in the aisle of moving ways did not appear. Invariably these men looked at him, and saluted him and Howard as they passed. He had a clear vision of entering a long corridor, and there were a number of girls sitting on low seats, as though in a class. He saw no teacher, but only a novel apparatus from which he fancied a voice proceeded. The girls regarded him and his conductor. He thought, with curiosity and astonishment. But he was hurried on before he could form a clear idea of the gathering. He judged they knew Howard and not himself, and that they wondered who he was. This Howard, it seemed, was a person of importance. But then he was also merely Graham's guardian. That was odd. They came a passage in twilight, and into this passage a footway hung, so that he could see the feet and ankles of people, going to and fro thereon, but no more of them. Then vague impressions of galleries and of casual astonished passers-by, turning round to stare after the two of them, with their red-clad guard. The stimulus of the restoratives he had taken was only temporary. He was speedily fatigued by this excessive haste. He asked Howard to slacken his speed. Presently he was in a lift that had a window upon the great street space, but this was glazed and did not open, and they were too high for him to see the moving platforms below. But he saw people going to and fro along cables and along strange, frail-looking bridges. Thence they passed across the street, and at a vast height above it they crossed by means of a narrow bridge closed in with glass, so clear that it made him giddy even to remember it. The floor of it was also of glass. From his memory of the cliffs between Newquay and Boscastle, so remote in time, and so recent in his experience, it seemed to him that they must be near 400 feet above the moving ways. He stopped, looked down between his legs upon the swarming blue and red multitudes, minute and foreshortened, struggling and gesticulating still towards the little balcony far below, a little toy balcony, it seemed, where he had so recently been standing. A thin haze and the glare of the mighty globes of light obscured everything. A man seated in a little open-work cradle shot by from some point still higher than the little narrow bridge, rushing down a cable as swiftly almost as if he were falling. Graham stopped involuntarily to watch this strange passenger vanish below, and then his eyes went back to the tumultuous struggle. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. So, I will say thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.